How the world's greatest D&D campaign began with Fall of an Empire. Hi everyone, All Things D&D is back with another story. This incredible story forged the foundation for the most incredible D&D campaign possibly ever. These stories are what make D&D amazing. Thank you for sharing this tale. Jeet from talesoftarster.com.
Not a single one out tonight, said Ilios as he looked up at the starry sky. Begging your pardon, your Imperial Majesty, says the armored man standing guard next to him. Have a look at the sky. Not a single one of the moons is out tonight, Ilios says, pointing up at the night sky. Huh, so it would seem. So many stars and not a single moon. That is indeed quite odd, your Imperial Majesty. Not just odd, Samuel. Statistically impossible. Our world has 20 moons. Do you realize just how much of an absolute anomaly it is for not a single one of them to be visible right now? I don't know much about statistics, your Majesty, but you're right. In all my years as a fighting man, I can't ever recall one night where there wasn't at least one moon out. In fact, I remember the one time in my life when I ever saw a single moon. It was the night that your Majesty's father passed. Indeed, Ilios sighs and takes a deep breath. I remember that day as well. It was fitting. The world did grow a bit darker that day. Yeah, but not pitch black. After all, we still had your Majesty, says Samuel with an encouraging smile. It is kind of you to say so, Samuel, but we all know I'm not half the man my father was. It's all I can do to keep the empire my forefathers built together. I can't truly make it thrive the way he did. You're too hard on yourself, your Majesty. Just look below you. Look out at that city. You hear that? People are happy and celebrating. They're drinking and feasting. That look like an empire barely being held together to you? The two men stood there for a moment quietly as they observed the festivities below. They stand atop the battlements of a monolithically high wall that boxed in the ancient and affluent manor houses and end establishments of the inner city, and towered over the most modest and pragmatically built outer city. This was Gran Arcades, capital of the Arcadian Empire, often called the Impossible City, not only for its near inhospitable location within the heart of the Arcadian desert, but also for its impregnable 40-story high walls that had fended off hordes of demons, devils, dragons, and all other manner of evils attempting to destroy it for thousands of years. Down below, past the gates of the outer city, a bitter cold night wind sweeps across the loose desert sands. The wind is strong and bold, and carries with it a wave of fine white sand that threatens to crash over the borders of the outer city. But just as the wave came down, it collapsed in midair and sank back into the desert, as if colliding with a smooth, invisible wall, leaving the outer city completely untouched. In Gran Arcades, the Emperor's protection extended to everyone, not just behind those big walls. They watched as the lights of festival lanterns and the sound of jovial music filled the night from both sides of the wall. The strong wind which carried the desert sand before now instead carried with it the savory smells of grilled meat, greeting the men on the wall with a strong push. Ilios's long dove-white hair and flowing white robes blows back in the gust, catching the starlight of the night, illuminating his regal figure like a celestial being from the heavens above. Samuel for a moment takes in the awe-inspiring sight of this man, so humble, so wise and majestic, the true image of what an emperor should be, and yet frail, oh so deeply frail. Sam looks down at the festivities below, at a city full of light, warmth, and laughter. Then he looks up at the sky. A bright starry sky full of endless possibilities, but no moons. This world had 20 of them, and on this day, the holy day of Ascendance, not a single one was present to attend the celebration. This is a dark omen indeed, your Majesty, Samuel says at last, breaking the silence. I don't believe in omens, Samuel. I believe in statistics, likelihoods, and finding the most efficient method of achieving my desired outcome. You think anyone down there has noticed, your Majesty? Samuel asks. Hopefully they'll be too swollen with drink and food to pay it any mind, Ilios responds. The last thing we need is the way of Tobias using this anomaly to stir the people up, talking about dark omens and the end being near. Praise the gods for festivals. Praise the gods indeed. If I might ask, your Majesty, why the interest in coming up here by yourself? Wouldn't you rather host a feast at the citadel, or at least go down and enjoy the festivities with the people? Those are bold questions to be asking your emperor. Have you been drinking on the job, Samuel? Your Majesty, I would never. Ilios gives the veteran fighting man a mischievous grin, for just a brief moment allowing the facade to crack, giving a little hint at the man beneath the Majesty. I'm just teasing, Samuel. Everyone in the Empire knows about your legendary discipline. Well, I'm not so sure I'd go as far as to call it legendary, but yes, I do adhere to a strict code of conduct when on duty. Except when asking your Emperor questions about his personal life. Forgive me, Your Majesty. I spoke out of turn. It's fine, Samuel, it's fine. For Ganymede's sake, you've been watching over me since I was a boy. A bit of impertinence is the least you've earned. So, are you going to answer my questions? Ilios sighs and takes a deep breath. Ascendance Day is a little bit harder for me than it is for most people. For other people, it's an event they're taught about as children, and relive through historical accounts, books and plays and the like. Ah, I see. But your education on the subject is a bit different from the common man's. Ilios nods. I didn't learn the history of my forefathers through books. I lived their lives, their captured memories, preserved in crystals for all time. Ilios reaches into his robe and pulls out a small ruby about the size of a pea. This ruby contains a copy of Emperor Ganymede's memories of Ascendance Day, right up to the moment he entered the Ark. I didn't know it was possible to copy the memory crystals. It wasn't, until Alexander and I found a way. Right now, we can only copy small snippets at a time, but hopefully we'll be able to do full copies someday. That's a state secret, by the way. Of course, Your Majesty. I've replayed the events in this ruby 113 times. Samuel says nothing, but his eyes widen in a mixed expression of surprise and fascination, clearly impressed. Ilios sighs. For me, it's as if I was there. When I look out over these battlements, I can see the war play out again perfectly. I can see the Barlgura crushing men under their apish fists. I can see the Balers cutting through swaths of our soldiers with fire and lightning. I can see the damage that was done to the citadel by Baphomet's mace. I know exactly which buildings in the inner city today are original, and which ones were added on later during repairs. The Emperor takes a pause and surveys the outer city. The city as we know it today would have been impossible in Emperor Ganymede's time. Extraplanar incursions being a near-daily event, having to spend day in, day out fighting fiends. Ganymede didn't have these mighty walls to hide behind whenever enemies came. Just one fortress on a hill made of transmuted sand, and whatever warriors from the scattered tribes of the desert he could muster up. I'm well aware, Your Majesty. Isn't that why we celebrate his ascendancy on this day? To give thanks for all the good fortune and prosperity his victory on this day gave us? Ilios stares out over the city, and the desert again, and points to the tall sand dunes clipping the horizon over the east. We celebrate our victory on this day, but the truth is we only achieve victory due to an act of divine intervention. Samuel nods. The Tarster cavalry came charging down the dunes of the east to smash the demon hordes between the citadel walls in their charge. But the Lord of the Hunt used blasphemous magics to sunder reality and summon even more fiends behind the cavalry, turning our hammer and anvil tactics into theirs. At the critical moment when all hope was lost, the sky split and the ark descended. I know the history, Your Majesty. You know it, but you haven't experienced it. Not the way I have. Every time I replay the events of that day, I see the desperation. I see the pain. I see the moment when hope starts to fade from the eyes of every man, woman, and child who was there. And yet somehow my ancestor Ganymede I did not waver. Somehow, despite all evidence to the contrary, he was certain that the day could be won. He had no idea the Ark was coming, no plan for how to turn it around. Yet he soldiered on and he fought, and he would have fought to his dying breath. It's absurd. I do believe most people call that heroism, Your Majesty. Yes, and it's maddening. I just feel awkward celebrating his achievement. It's a reminder that I'm never going to be able to measure up. Respectfully, Your Majesty, I don't think that's the right way to look at it. Meaning? Your forefathers were the products of their time. Ganymede I became a hero and legend because the world at the time needed a hero and legend. His era, and the era of many emperors who came after him, was fraught with danger, fending off one threat after another. And they all did this so you could be standing where you are now as sovereign of the largest empire the continent of Arcadia has ever known. And it's not as if you haven't had struggles of your own. You too have had to contend with the threats both foreign and domestic. You've lost family and friends, and you've been an exemplary steward of the foundations your ancestors have handed down. You are an exemplary ruler in your own right. There's no reason for you to have to compare yourself to your ancestors. Thank you, Samuel. I appreciate your kind words, I do. But you lack the same basis of comparison which I possess. Believe me, in the grand scheme of the myriad of achievements of Archimedes' emperors, My own accomplishments fall woefully short." "Very well," Samuel says with a nod. "However, none of that is a reason not to be down there celebrating with your people, or having a banquet of your own." "Excessive drinking and binge eating is not my cup of tea, I'm afraid." He shakes his head solemnly. "It's bad for the health, and it sets a bad example for other people." He nods his head as if agreeing with himself. "Simply not for me." "That's not what I hear whenever Lord Trevelyan comes to visit." He pauses at that and turns away somewhat bashfully. He hides his face behind his long white hair, but Samuel manages to catch just the faintest hints of blush right before he does so. "Yes, well, Alexander is the exception to many rules, including some of my personal ones." "You really hold Lord Trevelyan in high esteem, don't you, Your Majesty?" Samuel says with a knowing grin. "He's the only man who could ever convince me of the value of occasionally taking suboptimal action." "You should have hosted a feast like the one you did last year and invited him." No. Last year was strictly a matter of state. I had an agenda to meet last year, and I needed to gather certain key figures together to maneuver them properly. I have no such agenda this year." "What about for your own enjoyment?" "I'm perfectly capable of enjoying myself without sycophants on velvet sofas clumsily attempting to curry favor with me," he says with a sigh. "And besides, hosting a feast at the Citadel means having to station extra guards, having to put the entirety of the Citadel's kitchen staff on duty, bringing in all the servants to tend the guests. That's a lot of people who wouldn't get to see their families tonight if they were stuck working at the Citadel." "Well, why don't you go to someone else's party then?" "And where in the city could I go right now where my presence wouldn't cause a massive stir?" "You don't need to go to a party in this city." Ilios looks at the old fighter, single wide eyebrow raised questioningly. "You have a teleportation circle in the throne room which can be linked directly to Tarster," Samuel explains. Ilios considers this for a moment. "Who are the wizards on duty tonight?" "Adeptus Argyle. He volunteered to take tonight's shift so the rest of the court mages could have the night off." "Argyle. Name sounds familiar. What does he do again?" "Not much. He's mostly just the wizard equivalent of a mid-tier grunt." "And he's the only one on duty tonight?" "I believe so, yes." "Better not pull him off, then. That would be a serious security issue." "All right. Let me rustle up someone from the city, then. I know where a few of the Adepti like to go to get wasted." "I wouldn't want to suddenly impose on any of the court mages. I'm sure they're busy reveling at this moment as well." "With all due respect, Your Majesty, you are Ilios Archimedes, Emperor of Arcadia. If you tell the mages to use their magic to scrub toilets, their only response should be, 'What scent do you want them to have?'" Ilios shakes his head gingerly. "Abusing power is one of the quickest ways to lose it, Samuel." "Sure, but if you don't use it at all from time to time, then what's the point of even having it?" "I suppose that makes a certain degree of sense," Ilios says contemplatively for a moment before looking to the east again. He did so terribly miss his friend. "Very well. I shall send a message out to Alexander." "And I'll go see if I can rustle up a wizard who's sober enough to run the teleportation circle for us." "No need to search too hard if you can't find one. I can cure alcohol poisoning at a touch." "Ah, yes, the Emperor's hangover cure." "What's that?" "Nothing, Your Majesty. Just a little inside joke between us soldiers. I'll regroup with you at the Citadel." Samuel quickly dashes off before having to explain another word, his step surprisingly much more spry than one would expect from a man his age. He vaults over the side of the wall facing the inner city, and just as he begins to fall to what would otherwise be a brutal and certain death, two pairs of white feathery wings emerge from the heels of his boots and begin carrying him off through the sky into the heart of the inner city. "Show off," Ilios laments before reaching into his robes again and pulling out a black stone, which fit perfectly in the palm of his hand. It was made of smooth black obsidian and masterfully carved into the shape of a dragon's head. Alexander would have the other half it was paired with on his person. His was made of white marble and carved in the shape of an angel shooting an arrow. Normally, sending stones were made to match each other so that it would be easy to identify which pairs belonged together. But Ilios and Alexander wanted to do something special that reflected them. Ilios holds up the dragon piece to his mouth, and very concisely, being conscious of the stone's 25-word limit, says, "Lex, may I pop over to join you for tonight's festivities? I have no other plans." The reply arrives in minutes. Through the mouth of the dragon, he hears the gruff and sardonic voice of the Lord of Tarster. "I'm hosting a banquet with the Elven High Council trying to negotiate a marriage between their princess and Yorick. Of course you can come." Ilios smiles, but that smile quickly turns to concern at the mention of marrying off Yorick. "Right. Alexander hasn't figured out that Yorick is gay yet. I'm gonna need to have a talk with him about that later. He palms the stone, wishing he could send another message. Unfortunately, the stone only worked once a day, so there would be no sending replies. It didn't matter, he would be there soon. The Emperor looked out over his city one more time, as he stretched out and soaked in the night air. As he did so, a pair of large feathery white wings emerged from his back. They gave off a resplendent, radiant glow as they expanded over the battlement. He flexed his shoulder blades and the wings kicked off, carrying him towards the citadel in the center of the city, celestial light streaming behind him, leaving but a few stray feathers behind. The night air rushes beneath the Emperor's body, as his wings carry him aloft to the very center of the inner city. He reaches his destination within minutes, and takes a pause to admire the citadel from the air. The citadel was not tall or grandiose, essentially being just a 4-story high rectangular castle keep on a tall stone hill, with an archery tower on each corner. In fact, the neighboring mansions of the various lords and nobility, which took up residence in the inner city, certainly dwarfed the Emperor's own home in terms of size and opulence. But that couldn't be helped. The citadel was built during a time of brutal war, designed to be defensible, not beautiful. Ilios floated down to get a closer look. Braziers were lit on each tower of the citadel, illuminating the men with longbows standing guard on each one. Normally, there would be at least 2 archers on each tower keeping watch, but with the festivities in the city, more guards were needed on the streets to keep order, so the citadel was on a lighter guard tonight, with only 1 archer to a tower. He decided to inspect each post before landing. He noticed that 3 of the men on guard were slouching and carelessly smoking pipes, but the 3 straightened up immediately when they saw him approach. 1 man, however, did not. Or rather, he could not, as he was fast asleep sitting crouched with his back to a corner on his post at the northeast tower. "Tch," Ilios chided, as he glided over to the northeast tower. He stood there suspended in midair about 10 feet or so above the tower's brazier, which, judging by the dim light it gave off, hadn't been fed in a few hours. "Tch." He shakes his head disapprovingly, then sticks one of his index fingers upwards and begins rotating it. Gray clouds begin to form in the corner directly over the sleeping man's head, swirling faster and growing heavier with each swish of Ilios's finger. And then the release. The clouds grow so heavy they turn into water and deluge down on the man, waking him up with a shock, as if he had just had a bucket full of ice dropped on him. "Whoa!" The guard jumped up with a shout and fumbled to ready his bow and arrow. As he stood up, a clink of glass bouncing off the tower stone can be heard. Ilios sees the bottle rolling away from the frightened man and shakes his head disappointedly. "Your Majesty," the drenched man finally says with a gasp. I was, You were drinking while on duty and passed out," Ilios said directly. "Well, The man grasped at his throat as if trying to force out the words that were stuck there. "Do not trouble yourself with any attempts to lie to me, Bowman Lyle. Your willpower is not nearly strong enough to supersede the Emperor's vision. You will only hurt yourself in the effort." You what? Just made the entire citadel vulnerable by being derelict in your duty?" "I did not realize you knew my name," Lyle responded. Ilios paused at that, then smiled and let out a laugh. Lyle looked at the Emperor confused, but Ilios paid that no mind, as he came down from the sky and landed on the tower next to the soaking bowman. Ilios put a hand on Lyle's shoulder, and his clothes instantly went dry. "I know the names, faces, and ranks of everyone in the Imperial Guard, all the way from the commanders and captains down to the lowest squire." That's incredible, Your Majesty." "A ruler is only as capable as the people he rules. Every person has a place and a role to fill, no matter how big or small, and a weak point anywhere in that chain can cause the whole thing to break." "I am incredibly sorry, Your Majesty. I beg for your forgiveness." "It's not me you should apologize to. It's your fellow guardsmen." He points to the other towers in the distance. "I am certain they would all also rather be down in the city enjoying the drunken revelry, but they stayed alert at their posts by themselves. Your choice to drink while on duty not only results in your failure, but theirs as well. Imagine if an enemy had chosen to take advantage of the lowered security tonight to lead a night raid on the citadel. Your drunkenness would have provided just the blind spot a potential enemy would need to infiltrate. It didn't matter that the rest of the guards stayed awake and did their duty. Because you failed in yours, their efforts became wasted." I didn't think of it in those terms, Your Majesty. It's just..." "I know. Guard duty is boring and you're up here by yourself late at night. It's still not an excuse." "I'm deeply sorry, Your Majesty. It won't happen again." "No, it won't." And with that, Ilios pats Lyle on the shoulder and flies away, leaving the bowman stunned.
Back on the ground, Ilios could spot two figures making their way up the path to the citadel. Sam in his spotless plate armor, and stumbling up next to him a scraggly fellow in purple robes. The robed man was rail-thin and a bit shorter than Sam, with scruffy black hair and a wispy beard that had clearly grown out more as a result of neglecting to shave, rather than any intention to grow facial hair. Ilios recognized him as E-Kid, one of the Magus adepts of his court. Ilios noticed that Sam was holding E-Kid up by his shoulders, and the odor of liquor radiating off of him from 10 feet away explained why. "By Ganymede's wings, how much has he had to drink?" the Emperor asks as he fans his nose.
"Oi, stuff it, you overdressed pigeon, I ain't drunk," the wizard exclaims in a slurred voice. "One flagon," Sam explains.
One? He got this drunk off of one? I know wizards aren't exactly known for their bodily constitution, but still.
"It was dwarven ale," Sam elaborates.
Ilios sighs and massages his temples. Why do people keep drinking that poison? It's clearly meant for dwarves. It says so right in the name.
"Still, that shouldn't be a problem for you, Your Majesty. You can just, zap, pashoo,"
the old guard says as he makes a motion of tapping his front temple with his index and middle fingers. Ilios sighs. He was the ruler of the largest and longest-lasting empire in history. The degree of how far beneath him this particular situation was could not be measured with even the most accurate of scales. "Bring him here."
"Oi, oi, keep your sparky fingers off me. No one touches we with magic but me." "Get a grip, you useless lout. Your emperor requires your service," Samuel grunts as he holds the intoxicated wizard in place with a near bone-crushing grip on his shoulders.
"Thank you, Samuel." Ilios puts two fingers to E-Kid's sweaty forehead, and a brilliant white light flashed at the point of contact. It was done in an instant, and Ilios immediately backed away. "Better let him go. He should be about to..." The wizard starts retching globules of black vomit onto the white stone pathway. Samuel followed his sovereign's lead, holding his nose while the wizard proceeded to evacuate his acquisitions of the night's festivities from his stomach. Chunks of partially digested meat and expelled alcohol landed on the ground in a squelching black slurry that stank to high heaven.
"Emperor's wings,"
Samuel cursed, as the dreadful smell caused him to retch as well.
"I thought you could do a perfect restoration."
"I can," Ilios states simply.
"Then why? Why all this?"
Samuel gestures to the puking wizard wildly. Ilios shrugged. "He called me an overdressed pigeon." Sam chuckles at that.
"Who'd have thought the Emperor of Arcadia was the petty type?"
"Sorry, it's Alexander's influence, what can I say?" The wizard finally finishes after another minute or so of vomiting. Completely dried out, he wipes the bottom of his lip with the sleeve of his robe and looked up, eyes focused. He was stone-cold sober now. "Your Majesty," the wizard says, voice level and calm. He stares down at the puddle of puke at his feet, and then up at the Emperor again.
It would seem I had just made a fool of myself a moment ago."
"You most certainly did, Adeptus E-Kid," Ilios confirmed.
"Pardon me a moment, Your Majesty. I'll just deal with this mess here."
The wizard forms an arcane sigil in the air with his index finger, tracing blue lines of magic in the air as his finger moves. The lines then animated and swirled down to the puddle of goo at the wizard's feet, vanishing it instantly. "Prestidigitation," Ilios noted. "Terrifically convenient spell," the wizard adds. "Now, how may I be of service, Your Majesty?" "I need you to run the teleportation circle for me, so that I can take a trip to Tarster." "Not a problem at all, Your Majesty. Spatial magics are my specialty. I already have the requisite spells prepared." "Excellent. Let us be off, then," the Emperor declares, turning around to face the entrance to the keep. And as he did so, he freezes short. He stared at the entrance. It was a simple side entrance, with two guards posted at the left and right side of an ordinary wooden door, and a lantern hanging overhead between them. Nothing out of the ordinary at first glance, but something wasn't quite right. The moment he stopped short, Samuel stopped next to him. The veteran knight plainly noticed the same thing. The wizard, on the other hand, ambled forward cluelessly.
"E-Kid, wait!"
Samuel shouted. "Hmm?" The wizard turned around just a little too late. There was a blur at the entryway, and a large glowing scythe big enough to slice a man's torso in half emerged from the distortion. The motion passed in less than the blink of an eye, and the scythe ran cleanly down the wizard's front, in a streak of eerie green steel, blood scattering in tiny ruby-like droplets as he was cut down. The blasts ripped into the three men like a wall of burning spears. It was all E-Kid could do to put a shield of magic up to protect himself and stand behind Samuel and the Emperor as they took the full brunt of the assault. Beams of light tear into their bodies, feathers scatter, holes pierce through armor, and blood. So much blood scatters across the hall. E-Kid feels his knees buckle under the force of the blasts as he struggles to keep his shield up. Each attack he absorbed caused his barrier to ripple as he holds on for dear life. 1, 2, 3, 4. He didn't know when the barrage broke through, but when it did, it broke through everything. His lungs puncture, his bones shear, and the last thing he feels is a punching force right between his eyebrows as his body crumples and he goes down. E-Kid's body hits the ground with a hard thud that he doesn't feel. His entire body is numb. He tries to will his limbs to move or urge his voice to speak, but any attempt to do so results in barely twitching fingers and a chortling throat full of blood. The only things he can move are his eyes, which when they scroll down, see his collapsed body riddled with holes. And yet, not a single one of his puncture wounds was bleeding. A protective film of white light combed over his wounds, keeping him from bleeding out. He forced his eyes to glance up and saw Ilios, pointing back at him with a commanding finger. The Emperor's wings were pierced along their full length, feathers dyed a deep crimson. His elegant white robes now in bloody shreds, but he was still standing, blasted and bloody as he was. He was still the image of what an emperor should be. "Heal," he commands. E-Kid's body spasms and twitches as holy light rips straight through him, and his wounds seal up. Out of the corner of his eye, E-Kid spies Samuel climbing back to his feet as the healing swirls around him. Shield and sword in hand, the old guard stares down at the lineup of cultists.
"That hurt, you bastards."
Samuel dashes in, sword and shield in hand. Cultists bore their scythes ready to receive him, charging forward in to meet him in a rush of cold steel. But just before they meet, the cultists suddenly find themselves tangled in a mass of sticky white spider web conjured out of thin air. The webs bind and wrap around their limbs and joints, catching their scythes mid-swing and restraining them.
"Good cast," Ilios says back to the wizard. "Thank you, Your Majesty,"
E-Kid says as he stretches threads of magic between his fingers to finish the weaving of the web binding them in place. The enemies were restrained, unable to dodge or defend. Samuel weaved and danced around the cultists, taking advantage of their helplessness. In the blink of an eye, he dispatched 3 of them with brutal efficiency. The 9 remaining would not go down so easily, as they managed to start to slice their way through the webbing. Samuel meets them. Steel clashes on steel as sword meets scythe. He holds his own well, but soon the advantage in numbers they had begins to overwhelm him, and he takes cuts.
"Sir Samuel can't hold them off," E-Kid worries.
"The webs are flammable, right?" Ilios asked.
"Yes, but—"
Foosh! Boom! Ilios suddenly launches a fireball from his palm, engulfing Sam and the 9 remaining cultists in a baptism of fire.
"You hit Sir Sam!"
"Calm yourself, Adeptus. I know how to be careful with my spells." The vortex of the fiery explosion fades, revealing a clutch of burning cultists dancing amidst a bonfire of lit webs. But standing amongst them, completely untouched by the flames, is Samuel, who without hesitation runs his sword straight through the chest of one enemy, before swiftly pulling out and spinning around to decapitate another.
"Sorcerers,"
E-Kid grumbles, before putting a hand up and shooting a lightning bolt that skewered 2 more enemies. Ilios follows suit with a few shots from his radiant bow. Against all odds, the cultists were being pushed back. They were down to half their original number now. Sam couldn't give anyone special attention, as he had to keep them all engaged in the melee to prevent them from casting spells again. So it fell to Ilios and E-Kid in the back to pepper the enemy with spells and magical arrows to make them hurt. Suddenly, 2 of the cultists pull back. Samuel attempts to swipe at them to cut off their retreat, but the moment he does so, those remaining at the front take advantage and slash at him.
"The Lord of the Harvest shall take your ill-gotten bounty and bestow them upon the worthy," said a man's voice from behind one of the cultist masks.
"What do you know? They do talk," Samuel quips, as a tendril of inky blackness shoots from the hand of one of the cultists aimed straight at Ilios.
"Your Majesty!"
E-Kid tosses another counterspell, trying to hurry before the tendril hits its mark, but this time it was his turn to see his spell fizzle, as one of the other cultists managed to counterspell his counterspell, just seconds before Sam landed a killing blow on them. It resolved in fractions of a second. Counter spells counter. The black ray flies through, hitting Ilios square on the chest. His entire body is enveloped in an almost sludge-like necrotic haze, completely enveloping his regal form. And then, just as suddenly as it hit, it dissipates and Ilios stands there, barely even bothered.
"Really? An innervation spell,"
Ilios says. The understatement of his tone illustrated the sheer magnitude of just how unimpressed he was. He pulled his bow back and fired at the would-be hexer, landing an arrow of light in his chest. Over on his left, Samuel and E-Kid worked hard to polish off the remaining cultists. Steel flashes and lightning furies. More blasts of eldritch power go flying, but the 3 men hold out. At last, there was just one left. A woman, judging by her figure. Her breath is haggard and exhausted.
Tobias, the Lord of the Harvest, comes. He will reap you. You who are the poisoned fruit of corrupt gods. He will usher in an era of true bounty for all." "Enough," Ilios says, his voice unnaturally calm. "I've had it with your fanaticism. Samuel." Samuel dashes in and slashes at her legs, bringing her to her knees. "Kill me, seed of false idols. I go to Tobias's vast fields with pride." Ilios takes a deep breath. "Take off her mask." "No, no, no, no!" Samuel holds her still by the shoulders, and Kid removes her mask with a spectral mage hand. The mask came off and revealed a plain-faced woman with black hair. It was the kind of face that you saw passing through in a crowd and would never notice. There in your sight for a moment, then gone without a second thought. No one would ever remember a face like this in a crowd. No one, that is, except for Ilios Archimedes. "I know you," said the Emperor. The woman looked up at him, shocked. "No, you don't," she spat. "No one remembers me." "You're Maria," he continues. "The woman who turns the spit in the kitchens. The roast pig last week was succulent and crispy." The woman says nothing and stares up at him with angry, hate-filled eyes. "Is that how you all snuck in?" Ilios asks. "Are all of you just servants here in the citadel?" Again, Maria holds her tongue, adamant to make sure she doesn't speak. Ilios simply gives a sigh and shakes his head. "If you think that by refusing to speak you'll be able to circumvent the Emperor's vision, I'm sorry to disappoint you." He grabs her by the chin and stares down at her. His eyes turn pure white as his will begins pressing into her mind. His soft voice begins to take on more gravitas, almost echoing around itself as he speaks. "Ilios Archimedes commands you to speak. How many of the Citadel's staff are traitors?" 7, she finally answers, her face contorted as she struggles desperately against her imposed compulsion to speak the truth. "All kitchen and cleaning staff." "There's clearly more than 7 of you. How did you sneak everyone in?" "We brought them during the day, saying they were extra help hired for a feast that you decided to throw at the last minute." "I never do anything last minute. No one who knows me would believe that. How did you convince the guards?" She grits her teeth. Drool begins pooling at the corners of her mouth as she spits out her response. "We have a Kinku ally who created a copy of your royal seal. With it, we forged papers with your seal on them. The guards didn't question it." "How many people did you bring?" he questions. He pressed forward on her mind, wringing it like a wet sponge. "Gah!" She squealed in pain before blurting out, 32. "We killed 1 at the front, 4 on the way in and 11 just now," Samuel recounts. "That means 16 left," Kid tacks on. "I know how to math, wizard," Samuel retorts. "Gentlemen, focus." Ilios commands before going back to his interrogation. This time he presses on her mind with the force of a vice. "What is your objective? Why have you invaded this night? What could you possibly hope to achieve?" At that question, a wide, sinister smile spreads on her face. This time, she doesn't fight it. "Tonight, your reign ends, Emperor. Your role as the proxy of false gods ends tonight. Tobias, Lord of the Harvest, comes this night. He will reap you and your entire rotten empire. He will carve for us the path to true salvation, and we shall all be saved." "Your Lord of the Harvest is a demon," he says flatly. "You only say that because you are ignorant of the truth. You know not the true glory of Tobias, but you will. Oh, you will." "That may be so. I might not know the glory of Tobias, but I know warlock-packed magic when I see it, and you and all your cohorts reek of abyssal power." "Ignorant heathen. You wait. When the elders have finished the ritual, the Lord of the Harvest will come and he will reap you. Reap you! Reap you! Reap you!" "I've had enough of this. Samuel, if you would." Samuel puts his sword to the raving woman's throat and runs it clean across. She grasps her throat, chortling on her own blood as she slumps over. "We have to hurry. Come on, I'll heal you as we run." "How much magic do you have left, Your Majesty?" Kid asks. "More than enough to spare. More importantly, Kid, do you have dispel magic prepared?" "I do not," the wizard answers. "Damn it. Okay, fine. We'll need to interrupt the ritual the messy way." "I can't believe this is all just about some kind of summoning ritual," Samuel says as the 3 of them sprint. "If they just wanted to summon a demon, why not do so from the safety of an evil lair like most villains? Why all this effort sneaking into the citadel?" "It must have to do with the ley lines running right through the throne room," Kid explains. "Whatever they're summoning, it's big. Very big." "What about the sentinels?" Samuel asks. Ilios answers. "I didn't get an alert that they were active. Something must have disabled them. Bloody hells, the old knight curses. How deep does this treachery go? We don't have time to discuss this, Ilios interjects before stopping short in front of a pair of tall ivory doors carved into the shape of wings. We're here, the Emperor states before taking a deep breath and putting his hands on them. There are at least 16 very powerful warlocks on the other side of this door. Ilios takes a breath and takes a precious pause to think. He wasn't strong enough to settle this matter on his own. He knew that for a fact. The only reason he had gotten this far was due to Sam's prowess and Kid's quick thinking. He needed them right now, but he couldn't help but stop to think for just one moment. Was this really fair to the two of them? Sam had a wife, children, and multiple grandchildren, and Kid was an Adeptus Arcanus with a promising future ahead of him. He had already gone above and beyond his prescribed duty in coming with them this far. As foolish as the idea was, he had to ask them. Ilios opened his mouth, and Samuel abruptly cut him off. Don't even think about it, Samuel says flatly. Protecting you and the Empire is my sworn duty. It's my job to be here. There's absolutely no chance I'm turning away. Ilios nods at Sam and then turns to the wizard. Kid, you're weaker than myself and Samuel by a wide margin, and this is clearly far beyond the duty you were called for here tonight. I won't hold it against you if at this juncture you wish to... I'll be seeing this through, Kid interjects flatly. You'll need an expert in Arcana to interrupt their ritual. The Emperor nods. Hide on both sides of the door, he says. Then he gives the ivory doors a simple tap. Faint ripples of light radiate from the point where his fingers make contact, and the doors slowly open inwards. Ilios dodged to the left just in time to avoid a beam of eldritch energy that flies straight out as soon as the door opens. The first beam is rapidly followed by dozens upon dozens of others blasting through the entryway into the throne room, like a barrage of light-charged ballistae bolts. Dust kicks up as each and every blast shoots into the adjacent walls, obscuring the three men hiding to the side. Samuel takes his stance, getting ready to charge in. Wait, Ilios whispers before reaching over Sam's shoulder to touch his sword. Take this. A charge runs down Ilios's arm and straight into Sam's weapon. The cold steel begins to glow white-hot with holy power. Go! Samuel charges out from the plume of dust. His sword flashes, leaving a trail of sparkling white light behind him. The sound of clashing steel rings throughout the throne room as he dives into the fray, immediately grabbing the attention of 10 enemies at once. Ilios peeks out and sees no less than 16 masked cultists in his throne room, all equipped with scythes and casting more spells than he could keep track of. The room itself was a simple long rectangle with 6 suits of armor on each side of the room, facing parallel to each other, equipped with long menacing glaives. Stopping just short of the actual throne, Ilios saw a gathering of 5 cultists, equipped with stag masks made of gold, the antlers of which were longer and more ornate than the white masks they had encountered to this point. The elders that Maria was referring to earlier, no doubt. They were standing equidistant to each other with their arms raised up, chanting. However, his attention ultimately landed at the end of the room, where his sandstone throne resided. When his eyes locked onto it, his blood began to boil with raw, unfiltered rage. Standing there, standing on top of his throne, as if it were some kind of pedestal, was a cultist in long blood-red robes, wearing a ruby-colored stag mask, encrusted with red jewels that shine eerily in the dark. The ruby-masked leader peered down and locked eyes with him. He extended a red-gloved hand outward, and a ball of black fire materialized and condensed in his palm. Ilios countered by forming a ball of radiant white light in his own hand, and firing at exactly the same time as the ruby mask. The 2 magical projectiles flew forth, meeting each other in midair. Orbs of white and black crash into each other and explode. The shock wave is so loud and intense, Ilios could feel it in his bones. The intensity of the blast rings throughout the entire room, knocking several cultists prone and sending the ruby mask hurtling into the back of the sandstone throne. The impact rocks the cultist's body, and his mask comes loose, falling off his face. The heavy crimson horns crack as the mask falls to the floor with a hard clatter. When the dust settles, Ilios gets a clear look at the leader's face. It was the face of a gruff middle-aged man with graying hair. It was a modest face, the face of a man who never really stood out much in his life. It was the face of Adeptus Argyle. So, it was Argyle after all, Ilios thought. How did another one manage to get past me? Ilios's heart sinks at the revelation of yet another betrayal from within his own court. True, he didn't know Argyle that well. He was a mid-tier adepti with whom he did not interact often, but still, one of his court wizards nonetheless. And this cult, they got to him. They got to him just like they got to his little brother. With a heavy heart, Ilios hefted his bow and pulled back on the string as an arrow of light notched into place. He began firing. Meanwhile, the gold masks chant in a language which Ilios recognized as abyssal. With perfect clarity, he heard their blasphemous words as they conducted their ritual. Lord of the harvest, commander of time, supreme one of eternal battle, we call to you now in this hour of pure darkness. Your hour of victory is at hand. A circle of runes begins to glow beneath the gold masked cultist's feet as they chant. He didn't even need to get a close look to know what that circle was. He recognized the soft ruby red glow anywhere. They were using his teleportation circle to conduct this abomination. The anger already in his veins begins to bubble over at this indignity. However, that fury suddenly turned ice cold when he heard the final lines of their chant. Come forth and decimate the arrogant. Trample on the fruits of self-righteous gods. Destroy this corrupt and impure world. Bring forth a new age, the pure age. Reap what has been sown. Lord of the harvest, El Tab. Ilios screamed in terror at the top of his lungs. We have to stop them now! They're summoning a demon prince! A little busy here, Sam shouts as he parries another scythe swipe. His defenses barely hold up as he's surrounded by 10 cultists at once. Hang on, Ilios shouts as conjures another fireball in his hand. However, just as he's about to fire, a black tendril of magic shoots out and smothers it. One of the golden masked cultists counterspelled him. He only had just enough time to register what happened before finding himself suddenly hit with another barrage of eldritch blasts, the agonizing force of which rips through his flesh and sends him flying back. He hit the wall outside the throne room with a cratering impact. His body leaves a bloody trail down the wall as it slinks down to the floor. Your Majesty! Ekid runs to the Emperor's side. There's too many, Ilios croaks as he coughs out a glob of blood. Counterspell. I saw. Hang on. I have something that can help, Ekid says as he drags the Emperor's mangled body out of the view of the door. Wait, Sam. We'll get back to him. Just heal for now. I need to be out of their sight to cast this spell. Ilios does as the wizard instructs and begins focusing his magic to seal his wounds and regenerate any missing bits of flesh. His bleeding stops and he regains movement in his limbs, but the scars remain. The healing was starting to be less than perfect. His magic was starting to run thin. Meanwhile, a kid next to him begins uttering a series of arcane chants in quick succession, scrambling to get his spell up as quickly as possible. Too long. Much too long. He had to get back. He had to go help Sam. He struggled to push himself back to his feet, but just as he does so, another cultist appears through the doorway of the throne room. His dark robes fluttered behind him with the speed of his dash. He pointed a finger at Ilios and another beam shot forward, flying straight for his face. This was it. The final blow. It was over. Arcadia was doomed. He was going to die here. Not in some great battle, but in a random hallway outside his own throne room by a faceless cultist. And then, the beam fizzles. More accurately, it collides with the shimmering, translucent shell of force that suddenly springs to life around them, splatters like a squirt of water on a brick wall, and then fizzles. Globe of invulnerability set, the wizard says with a confident smile. Ilios lights up with hope as he gets back to his feet. Good work, Adeptus. Let's get these interlopers out of our castle. The Emperor snaps his fingers, and 7 motes of light materialize around his head, forming a crown of stars. He points a finger at the cultist who just shot at them, and a mote of light shoots forth and blasts them away. Wasting no time, the wizard and Emperor stride back into the room. More blasts of eldritch power shoot at them the moment they enter, but the globe of invulnerability holds. They enter just in time to see Samuel get cut down under a hail of 6 scythes. Heal! Ilios commands, pointing to Sam's collapsed body. A tendril of black flies in again, another counterspell. It wraps around the globe attempting to stop his healing, but is repelled, scattered like scraps of cloth in the wind. Ilios' spell goes through, filling Sam with healing light as the old knight stands back up again, and as he comes back to his feet, he returns the gifts his enemies gave him tenfold. Sam lands slash after slash of fatal blows on cultists who were already exhausted from having to take him down the first time. In almost the blink of an eye, 3 cultists lost an arm, a leg, and a head in quick succession. The streaks of white left behind by Sam's illuminated blade traced the pattern of his attacks before fading out. His advantage didn't last. Skilled and empowered by Ilios' magic as he was still just 1 man against 7. They were overwhelming him with sheer numbers. Sam needed backup, now. Ilios looks to the left and then to the right. The dozen suits of armor were immobile. Why weren't the sentries helping? They should have been attacking the moment someone not authorized to be here entered the room. Ilios closed his eyes and reached out to the ley lines, the veins of magic that ran through the world upon which Grand Arcades was built. He could feel them, the rush of arcane power flowing all around him. He opened his eyes and he saw. They appeared to his vision as thin blue lines that remained straight, turning only at sharp 90-degree angles. They coursed all throughout the walls of the citadel, carrying currents of magical power along their lines in bright light. He scanned fast, looking for the lines that connected to the sentinels. He found them, hard to discern amongst the lines which glowed vibrantly, but they were there, dull and black. The magic to the sentinels had been cut off, meaning at present they were no more than ordinary suits of armor. He looks to his throne, which Argyle was blasphemously standing on with his filthy, traitorous feet. All the ley lines connected together at his throne. This was how he normally controlled the city's magical systems. Of course, it wasn't the only way. He looked down at his feet. The ley lines spread all over the floor. They sparked in response to his steps, a sign that they recognized who he was. He had seen it played in the crystals before. Ganymede could control the ley lines wherever he was in the city, as could other mighty emperors throughout the ages. His own attempts to do so before had never been successful, but this, maybe, just maybe. "Kid, cover me," he says as he bends down and puts his palm on the floor. He channels his power into the lines on the ground and attempts to force his mind to begin traveling along the streams of magic. He focuses hard, forcing his raw power into the ley line. Energy streams down his arm in a swirl of blue light, yet the ley line doesn't respond. Meanwhile, the battle raged around him. Kid fires off yet more lightning bolts, and Sam hacks and slashes like a mad surgeon. They were fighting so desperately to buy him just a little time. He couldn't let their effort go to waste. He couldn't fail them. He had to make this work. He had to make this work. He had to make this work. His mind traveled along the path of energy and into the ley line, and it began to work. He could feel his consciousness sliding along the current, getting swept away in the flow of magic. He needed to reach the sentinels, but to do so he had to travel up the ley line, through the conjunction point at his throne, and then through the deactivated lines which led to the sentinels. Forcing his mind against the current was a sensation not unlike swimming up a waterfall. He didn't have a choice, though. This had to work. He grit his teeth and made like a salmon and swam upstream. In the physical world, mere seconds seemed to pass, but in the landscape of his mind it felt like he was pushing against the current of magic for hours. He pushed, and he pushed, and he pushed, and just as he got to his throne, he felt a counterstroke. A feeling like hot coals raking over his brain rocked through him, as Argyle sent a lashback wave of power through the ley lines using his own throne. The force was so severe his mind suddenly snapped back to his body like rubber. He screamed in pain as he came back to his body. It didn't work.
"Aim for the god spawn,"
Argyle commands.
"Without his power, the rest falls apart."
The white masks remaining peeled off of Samuel and went straight for Ilios and Ekid, their scythes bared. Plainly they saw that spells wouldn't work anymore. Ilios responds by shooting more motes of light at the oncoming cultists, but there was more coming, than he had stars in his crown. The moment they got in range to use their scythes, he and Ekid would be cut to ribbons. He looks to the circle where the golden masks were gathered, just 100 feet away from where they stood near the entrance. He just needed to stop the ritual. That was it. He turns to Ekid. "Get us to the circle." "Yes, Your Majesty," the wizard responds, before grabbing Ilios by the shoulder. He flicks his wrist out and a rectangular corridor of light appears before them. As the cultists charged at them, the two men charged forward through the conjured pathway and disappeared before the stampede could reach them. Another flash of light, and the two men reappeared in the center of the circle, amidst the 6 golden masks. The ruby-red circle brims with magical power beneath their feet. Ilios could sense the immeasurable power of the being they were attempting to summon on the other side. He had to act now. He had to be decisive. This was his moment to live up to his forefathers' legacy. He raises his bow overhead, preparing to slam it down on the circle, to break the sequence of runes. He musters up all the strength he could in his arms, and then, screaming. Earth-shattering, mind-destroying screaming rips through his mind and poisons outward through his whole body. The screaming seems to be coming from everywhere and nowhere. Gritting his teeth, he tries to hold on to his sanity. He could tell by the way his body reacted to try and fight it off that this screaming was the result of a spell, an extremely powerful spell, so strong even the globe of invulnerability couldn't keep it out. He strains to turn his neck to find the source of the spell, and sure enough it was Argyle, standing triumphant on the sandstone throne, waves of psychic energy ripping throughout the throne room, originating from his ruby mask. There was no mistaking it. This was the Mind Shatterer, the terrifying 9th level spell. Psychic Scream. It's just a spell. It's just a spell. You can hold on. You can hold on. Can you, though? Who said that? You did. Be quiet. I need to focus. I need to hold on. Hold on for what? I need to stop these cultists from destroying the city. Why bother? Why? Because if I don't, the Empire will fall. The Empire is destined to fall anyway. Silence! You speak lies. You already know that you can't produce an heir. The Archimedes line is going to end with you. What does it matter if it ends today or a few decades from now? No. My forefathers dedicated their lives to seeing Arcadia prosper. And as a result, you've spent your entire life living in their shadows. His mind was quiet. He didn't have a response to that. It was true he had lived his whole life in his ancestors' shadows. He could do nothing for the Empire that hadn't already been done. Let it die. Let something new rise up from its ashes. If the Empire is allowed to continue, it will only lead to further stagnation and suffering in the long run. Better to harvest it now while it's ripe. Let the Empire end at its peak. Ilios could think nothing in response to that. It was true. The Empire had existed for thousands of years now. What was there left to do? And it wasn't as if the nation was some sort of utopia. It suffered from corruption and prejudice like in any other era in history. His inability to help the Empire evolve and grow past such petty things was clearly the mark of his failings as a ruler. Perhaps it was indeed better to let things end now at their peak, rather than a slow, sad, gradual decline that it would be fated to under his rule. It's okay. You did your best. It's time to take a rest. Let go. Ilios's arm slumped to his side, and his grip on his bow loosens. It dropped from his hand before evaporating into particles of light. Next to him, he made out the faint image of a kid curled up in a fetal position, clasping on his head for dear life. Across the way, he saw Sam, whose entire body rocked with the force of the psychic screams. He watched as the skin on his longtime friend's body rippled before his head exploded into countless tiny chunks. And then, lastly, he looks down and watches as a black portal to the abyss opens up beneath his feet. Suddenly, a gigantic armored hand big enough to fit 10 of him rises up from the blackness. It shoots up with the force of a volcanic eruption. Ilios collapses onto his back, pressed to the giant palm as it rapidly lifts him upwards and bursts through the ceiling of the citadel. He feels the full force of the impact as his bones shatter from the collision with the thousands-year-old concrete. All feeling in his body is gone. Then the giant hand begins to close around him, and the world starts to go dark. The last thing he sees is his city and his people, laughing, making merry, eating, drinking, and celebrating being alive. It was a wonderful way to end an empire. 30 years later. Alexander Trevelyan, Lord of Tarster, stands regal and proud before the long silk sash that barred the entryway to the newly constructed Adventurers Guild Hall. He spares a glance for Pierce, the crippled master of the guild, and gives him a curt nod as he draws his sword.
Are you certain you wish for me to commemorate this occasion?
The Lord of Tarster asks. This would not have been possible at all without your support, your lordship, Pierce answered from his humble position in his wheelchair.
Not what I asked.
It matters not who cuts the ribbon, just as long as it is known by all that it has been cut, Pierce says firmly.
You really think they'll come?
Alexander asks. I know they will. The world has finally settled a bit. It's ready for a new age of adventure. They will come looking for it, and when they do, they will need a home. Alexander strokes his neatly trimmed blonde beard thoughtfully, then nods.
As long as they and your guild remain an asset to the city, you have my support.
He makes one swift slash, and the sash is halved.
Cheers to the new era of adventurers.
I absolutely cannot wait to hear about the next set of incredible adventures in the world of Tarster, and more are coming. Please let us know what you think and comment below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, All Things D&D. Our videos are posted every Tuesday and Friday, so stay tuned for more amazing Dungeons & Dragons content.